Welcome to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Markle. I'm a curriculum development specialist here at NCBRT, and I work in collaboration with subject matter experts to create valuable and timely training for the responder community. The National Center for Biomedical Research and Training provides mobile training to both the national and international emergency response community. So last time on the podcast, we talked to Todd Short and Eric Vandenburg about pre-operational behaviors. This time, we'll finish up our series by talking about creating and executing a plan. So I know we dived into this a little bit last time, but now that we've identified suspicious behavior from an individual or a group, how do we begin to take action?
$65,000 question, Eric.
Yeah, that is a tough question to answer.
This is the quintessential. What do you think it depends on?
Well, it depends on the event. It depends on what resources you have available to be able to put something in plan. And again, I go back to what I talked about in the other podcast was if it's a planned event, we kind of know from past histories how things are going to go. Therefore, we already have elements in place to be able to deal with it. So we've got that plan. $1,000 question is, well, we have an unplanned event, what I like to refer to as an incident. Something breaks off that we were not expecting, we weren't planning for. We don't have a plan in place. Now, can we use some of the elements that we have for event planning to be able to put in place? Sure, but we just have to be able to call those resources to that particular location. If we see all of a sudden that there's an uptick about suspicious activity in a particular area, we may want to flood the area with more uniformed personnel. We may want to do roving patrols to be able to figure out where we can go from here, because now all of a sudden we see some reported suspicious activity happening in the area. That's my thought.
Taking action's tough. It's tough because if we're going to do it, we need to do it right the first time and every time. Because I don't want to be on the front page of the news saying I did something I shouldn't have done with the information that I had at the time. And would a reasonable person with that information have taken that particular action? Todd, why did you do what you did? If my hand's on the Bible and the other one's up in the air, I want to be able to testify that I did what I should have done at the time that I did it because I had this information. And Ashley, I'll preface this by saying whatever comes out of Todd Short's mouth, whatever you do, follow your SOPs where you work. So if something I'm saying is trumping where you work and your SOPs, don't listen to Todd Short, do your own thing. That being said.
That's how you keep your job and you collect your pension.
Yeah.
Well, pensions are important. Pensions are important. The thing I always preach is treat people the way you want to be treated, and everything generally takes care of itself. It's a downhill struggle from there.
True.
But you got to apply your context, whatever context it is, to your observations before you act. You got to be able to articulate why you did what you did. I don't think we've historically done a fantastic job in the safety and security field with training people necessarily on how to do behavioral assessments. I think it's not necessarily Academy 101, Eric. I think it's things that you learn over time as you work the streets and you're taught by your fellow officers that are doing things. I think context comes from your own social mores and how you've been brought up, the experiences that you've had in your life. But regardless of what those things are, the thing that I would impress upon people is when you decide to act and you decide to do something, then you need to commit to doing it. Don't go halfway. I use the analogy, if it's a squirrel and you're zigzagging in the middle of the road, you're probably going to eat it. Don't be the squirrel. If you decide to go ahead and run across the street, then run across the street. Eric, you guys got squirrels in New York City? You got squirrels there? I'm just kidding. Don't answer that question. Don't answer that question.
They're smart. They usually just throw up a finger at the car that's approaching.
Yeah. But if you're going to decide to act, do it. We talked about keeping your head on the swivel. Ashley, I love the story about, how old's your baby?
She's 2.5.
She's 2.5. So there's so much responsibility with that. And whatever you decide to do, you got to try to keep a 360-degree view to the greatest extent possible. Obviously, we were not born with eyeballs in the back of our skull, but everything that you're going to commit to doing, if you're deciding to act, then you need to view that suspect as a threat. So don't go halfway with it. Think about all your officer safety stuff that you were taught since the very first day. I think about everything from those leaks we talked about and the fumes, the funny smells, I'm in a bad place. I'm thinking about even if I place this person in custody, what does this person have in their pockets before I start digging into them subsequent to arrest, right? So we're not violating any constitutional law. If somebody's got a drug problem and they're a hype and they've got needles that are sticking directly up out of their pockets and I go in, I don't want to be stuck with anything. So while we can't always live in condition red, which is what we talked about earlier, when it comes action time, you don't have a choice. Now you're in red throughout the duration. So you got to absolutely commit to doing that. And then when you get there, the other thing I would mention is think about your decision metric tree. If you give it out with the person and the person through whatever investigative channels is determined not to be a threat, kick him or her loose. If the person is determined to be a threat, then you got to, I call it the old observe it, interview it, and hold it paradigm. So I've observed it. Now I want to talk to it to be able to determine what he or she knows. And then once I get to the holding stage, I got to think about, okay, am I going to hold? And if so, for how long? Because it can't be unreasonable. Obviously, the totality of the circumstances is going to dictate what reasonable is. If I don't have anything, then I'm going to kick that person loose. If I do have something on that person and I have to detain for a reasonable amount of time or place that person under arrest, how's that going to look like? I got to document everything that I do. I mean, the report is obviously very important at the local level. Who knows where this thing's going to go? Depending on what this person is, what group they're a part of, what crime they've committed, is it determined to be an act of terrorism under a DOJ definition or an FBI or a DOD definition? If it comes to that level, I mean, this could be a national thing, so we got to be very, very careful with that, which I suppose leads into interviewing. So, Eric, before I think about interviewing, what did I miss on the whole decision-making metric? What did I screw up on that?
Well, no, you brought up a good point about behavioral threat assessments. The fact that if we can empower the community to come forward when they are aware of information, that's half of our job. We have to count on a lot of these bystanders coming forward with what they see. We can't be everywhere all the time, so we do have to count on the general public, and that's going to factor into what we do. But I agree with you as far as, you observe it. Is it baseline? Is it normal? Can it be explainable? Can you rationalize what you're seeing in front of you? If not, okay, let's go interview. Let's find out. Can this person explain what he's doing? Why is he unloading all these things out of the trunk of his car right alongside where we're going to have a major parade kickoff? We're not supposed to have any cars here. So we're going to say, why are you here? What are you doing? Can you explain? Maybe he's dropping off, I don't know, supplies to a store that's along the route. If he can explain it, that's fine. Cut him loose. If not, we'll have to question him a little further. If we find that he's up to criminal behavior, we may have to place him into custody.
And that launches us into the big interview. So I feel like I'm Dan Rather launching us into the big interview here. But the interviewing, I tell you, Eric, we've been around long enough to know that some people are really good at it, and some people, it's more of a challenge for them. How we talk to people, in a formal or an informal setting is really 90% plus of what we're supposed to be doing on our job anyway. If we're going hands-on every 20 minutes, I have to use the tools on our tool belt, we're probably not doing our job as effectively as we should. That being said, when it comes to interviewing somebody on the street, what are the things that you're looking for to be able to get the information that you need, and or what are you looking for potential signs of deceit?
Body language.
Like what?
Well, people can rehearse a story. They may have a backstory that they've created in advance to try and get past law enforcement. But really, what they can hide is their nonverbal cues, their body language. You can see when somebody's nervous. They'll go through little things that will show that they are nervous and not at ease, especially when they're being untruthful to you. Those are some of the things that you have to focus your attention on.
You got any good stories on the biggest lie that you were ever told?
You're asking me to
Or,
go back in ancient history.
or is there so many of them that you
I'm
can't
sorry, Honor,
possibly
I don't
remember just
recall.
one?
I
You know,
can't
it's
recall, Your
funny.
Honor.
When I first started this job, Ashley, I was with a person who had been doing the job for almost 30 years. And one of the first things he said to me when we were riding around in the car together, he said, "Recruit, you're going to become a human lie detector by the course of your career. By the time you turn your stuff in, your wife's not going to like you. Your kids may never want to talk to you again because every time they lie to you, you're going to know it and you're going to call them on it." And I'm like, "Sir, well, how do I figure that out?" He said, "It's just time and experience." He said, I'll never forget this. He said, "If somebody tells you these two phrases, the next paragraph out of their mouth is a complete fabrication." So I'm waiting with bated breath. I got to hear what these two are. And he says, if somebody says, "I swear to God, dot, dot, dot," the next thing that's coming out of their mouth, forget about it. Am I saying that correctly? Eric, forget about it? Am I saying that all right? All right.
Forget about it.
Forget about it.
I said, "What's the second sentence?" And he said, "I got to be honest with you, dot, dot, dot." The next thing that comes out of their mouth is a complete lie. He said, that's when you just take them in. Just take them in. And I said, "That's really, really interesting." When I'm talking to somebody on the street, we talked about, officer safety, you got to keep your head on a swivel. The thing I always tell my people is think about your officer distance. Don't be getting too close. Don't be getting too far away. If the person bolts, you have to be able to reactive stance to be able to get that person. If we're going to take action, then we got to do it tactically because you may be by yourself. If I'm in New York City, I may have 20 people at various street corners that can respond very, very quickly because they're standing on the corners as a part of their patrol duties. Most cities don't have that. The other thing I tell my folks is the eyes are the windows to the soul. So you got to trust your instincts. If I'm talking to Eric on the street and he's making absolutely no eye contact with me, I got to tell you, the human lie detector in me comes out and says whatever this guy's pouring out of me is absolutely more than likely not accurate. The little vein thing that shoots up here or here, whatever these things are called. I wasn't in med school, believe it or not. But if those things start thumping,
Your arteries.
the arteries, thank you, Eric. It's very profound. If the arteries start protruding, right, that's probably a pretty good sign that something isn't correct. Although I will say that as somebody who has been stopped by the police, both before my career started and after my career started, I'm still nervous and I'm still anxious if and when I get pulled over. I'm still anxious and I'm still nervous if I have a face-to-face conversation with somebody on the street in uniform. "Hey, Mr. Short, did you see what happened over here?" I mean, it's happened since I've been on the job. So these people may not know me from a hole in the ground. So it is somewhat normal for somebody to have a physiological reaction to somebody in uniform. But I also think about movements. If somebody starts blading their stance away from me in an interview process, sitting up in my chair, somebody starts kind of doing one of these as they're clamping in, or they closing themselves off because they don't want to give me any valuable information because they're creating really a physiological barrier between me and them. I think about that. Talking about blading your stance and opening up your hips, so they're going to take off running from me. Eric, I don't know what your thoughts are, but especially in high profile events, if we're talking about target selection and we're talking about people that could be doing really silly things. If I spot somebody that I think is in a crowd that is of particular interest, I generally don't want to approach that person by myself unless I absolutely have to. Or if I have to approach that person by myself, then I at least want a radio call out to give me some kind of perimeter around me. So if the person takes off, they number one, they know where I am, and they can surround the suspect. So hopefully that person does not break containment. What do you think about that? Because I don't want to cause a
That all
public
goes back
panic
to
if I
body
don't
language.
have to. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. No, you're right.
Because if you're in a
Especially if
crowd
you're
of
dealing with a
people,
big crowd.
go ahead, I cut you off.
That can go either way. You could have a crowd of people who are helpful or maybe not so helpful, and it can go completely the wrong way, especially if you're by yourself. That's why it's important to be able to have assistance around you. Um, there was an event, I'm sure you've seen it on the news the last couple of days, about the two officers who were attacked in New York City and beat up by some of the migrants. Um, it was just basically everybody pile on, and those
Yeah.
officers didn't have any assistance,
Yeah.
and everybody just took off after that. So it all depends.
Yeah, it does. I suppose the answers to a lot of these questions are it depends. If and when it's possible, I like to put mass on a suspect, meaning there's more of us than there is of that particular person, just in case
Yeah.
it goes south. It's hard because I don't want to cause a public panic if I'm trying to pluck somebody out of a crowd for further investigative purposes. But if it's necessary, you got to do what you got to do. If somebody causes a ruckus, it's the 4th of July parade and they're with their family and the spouse or significant other steps up and says, yeah, well, you're not taking me anywhere unless I can go with you. Well, if it's going to cause the disturbance to be a little bit less, okay, come on over here. Let's go next to the big oak tree and we'll sit there and we'll talk about it. Again, get your officers, get your masks, get your numbers in place so it'll hopefully play out better for you. When you've got that person, it's especially in certain emotional encounters, sometimes it may not even lead to a detention or an arrest. I've seen it where people have been kicked loose and the name's never been run on the person. So that's obviously a fairly substantial mistake, because if we have that person and we're speaking with that person, then we want to run that person's information through the NCIC leads database, that kind of good stuff. Because if they do have a connection to certain federal databases that may or may not be linked to certain criminal activity, we will know that when we run them through NCIC. So whatever handling codes you get back from the Terrorist Screening Center, which is a very valuable tool, will give you instructions on what to do with that person depending on the level of the hit. So if it's a level 3 hit and, we just want to get the person's name and information and give them back to the local FBI, JTTF, we can do that. If it's a level 1 hit and the person's got to be arrested for whatever, because we've been looking for this person, that's a fantastic opportunity. When you're with that person, if you weren't sure you had charges on them, well, guess what? Now you do. So now you can go ahead and take care of business because you're going to get direct authority to be able to do that through the TSC hit. As an aside, anything I'm
We
missing on that?
have a lot of tools at our disposal. No, you covered it.
So we've recorded 3 episodes about this topic. Is there any sort of last takeaways or last final thoughts you'd like to leave us with before we sign off for this series?
Keep your eyes open. Always be cautious. Listen to what people in the community have to say, because it could be important information. Look for and be aware of that suspicious behavior that goes against your baseline. Todd?
Don't ignore your instincts. Rely on the training that you've had throughout your career. If something doesn't feel right, don't be afraid to take an action. It's really easy in 2024 to say, I just don't know if I want to stretch the boundaries of the limit. I don't know if I should or I could. I would challenge you to think about why you got into this business in the first place. Why was it important to you? What do you think you were charged with? when you took the badge and you took the oath and all the wonderful things that go with that. When you do the right things for the right reasons and you treat people the way you want to be treated, generally you're going to have a very productive and positive career. Don't ever forget that, because once you lose sight of that, it makes for a long run.
Like that pension.
Pensions are good.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this series. Just really appreciate your participation.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, please send us an email at podcast@ncbrt.lsu.edu. Make sure you subscribe to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'll see you again next time.